Okay, hi guys. So for my procedural script, I've created a tool that makes it easy for me to create a cluster of trees in Maya. So I've focused on creating two versions of the Spruce tree, and a live version and a dead one. So if you look at my complete scene now, you can see that I have an alive version there, and then there's also a dead one placed right there. So it basically is the same tree, but without the pine needles on it. Okay, so let's walk through the script. So the user can create up to 20 trees in a group. So it can create 10 alive trees and also 10 dead trees. The reason why I chose to have a limitation here is because the amount of meshes that are created each time a tree is generated is pretty huge. So this makes it hard for Maya to generate them quickly. So it gets quite slow. So it's better to take it a step at a time and just see how it looks. There's also plenty of small tweaks, but let's we can walk through the script, the actual code later, so I can show you. But let's just try to create one of each now, and you can see how they look. Okay, so now I've created one alive tree and one dead tree, and if you see here, you can see that they are right now they are about the same height, but they randomize the height. They also randomize the length of the branches, and also some small differences between the different stages of the branches, and where they start. It's also different. So we can try to go one more time and see. Yeah, so you can see that these two trees, they have different height. But the script doesn't really just create the trees, it also combines the pine needles, so the texture right there, with the right branch. So you can see that these are the same object in the outliner, and so you can't really modify either the pine needles or the branch separately after I've combined them. And it does also delete the history after I've combined the two objects, and groups the individual meshes that belong to each tree together in the outliner. So you can see here that since I created two, they have grouped every single mesh that belongs to this tree under the same group. And then we also have tree 2, which is this one, under a separate group. And on top of that, I also added a top layer group that makes it possible for me to move around both trees in the same tree cluster, or even more if you like create 5 or 10 or something like that. So you can move them around together. Okay, so when I came up with the idea to create this type of script, that was pretty early in the process. It's a very essential part of my scene, because I really wanted to create a forest really of these types of trees, because it's based on this show Stranger Things, and these types of trees, they pop up in the show very often. Which is why I think it's very important to have it in my scene. And one issue that I had when I were trying to find or like gather up research around this script is that I couldn't really find any procedural script that did create exactly these types of trees and in this method that I was looking for. I couldn't really find any script that created some well or good looking Spruce trees like I want them to look. And that was quite hard because many of the scripts that I found out there were based on recursion. So they created a branch upon a branch and upon a branch again. And that's the problem, is that I didn't want to do it that way because it creates a lot of different meshes. I already have a lot of meshes when it comes to the branches that are sticking out from just the stump. And to create branches that stick out from each individual branch again, that is going to be a huge amount of meshes. So if you see my outline here, you can see this is just cluster 3, which combines this many trees. And inside here you have like so many objects, so it takes up a lot of the capacity of Maya, which is wouldn't be good if I went over to recursion, because then it would be even longer. So I decided to find a tutorial for how you can do this in regular Maya way, like creating the individual cylinders and just combining them like I did with a monster or with a building right here or something like that. I just basically followed that tutorial and started to create the different objects inside, like by using Python. So I made a reference model first and then worked with that to make my script, really. So I knew how I wanted it to look, and then I just created the materials and textured it and made it a little bit randomized, as I showed you earlier. So, okay, the actual script, it's actually quite long. It's right above 200 lines. And that is mostly because I create so many different types of objects that are different from each other. They aren't like the stump needs to be created, it needs to be textured and UV edited or UV mapped. And I need to do the same with the branches, but in a little bit of different way because it's not the same object. And then I also have to do the same with the leaf and so on and so on. So, but the process of creating it was actually pretty straightforward at the to begin with. All I had to do was make it inside Maya, find the commands in the technical documentation, and translate those commands to Python from Mail. Since I only created a white shaded version of the tree to begin with, this was pretty much the same thing I did when creating the branches and leaves too. So started out with the stump, and then I continued on with the branch, and then I did the same with the leaf. I decided to separate each individual object from the tree in separate functions. So you can see that I create first one object or one type of the object, and then I start to create another one, and then I always finish it. So it's not like I have one function that creates many different meshes, and then I have another function that UV maps all the objects. I think it was just easier to combine everything under the same or everything that I do with one object inside the same function. It makes it a little bit more easy to read for me, and then I comment on the places that I might be a little bit confused if I look at it later. If I were to work with someone else on this script, I would probably be a little bit better at commenting it, but since I'm the only one who's actually going to use it now, I decided to just do that very simple, not focusing too much on the commenting. And I haven't had any problems reading the script after I created it either. So yeah. After each object was actually created, like the mesh, I started to look into UV mapping and texturing. For the stump and branches, this proved to be pretty straightforward because it's really just a cylinder. So, like, both of them are cylinders, and then I've taken down the subdivisions a little bit. And then I basically just UV mapped them and then added the correct material to it. It took some time to actually do it, but once I got in the flow, it wasn't really that hard. But it was a bit more tricky when it came to the pine needles, because there's more faces, and they are supposed to be on the same or almost the same angle, and but the only thing I do is like move a couple of vertices, so it doesn't take up too much space. But yeah, they're the same texture, so it's the same object all over again, which made it a little bit faster than what it would be if I decided to create like different types of it. And if you look at my main scene, it's not you can't really see that much of a detail of the branches or the pine needles, so it doesn't really matter really. If I were to create this script all over again, or just work on it more, I would probably maybe create some kind of a randomization, or randomize between different objects that I create in a list, which is different types of pine needles that looks almost the same, but yeah, they aren't the same object. Okay. The next step was to combine the branches with the pine needles, so it was the same object. Since the script didn't modify either the branch or the pine needles separately anymore, it made sense to just combine them. The objects gets a little bit smaller, so it's easier to move the object around. In the same function, I also do some small tweaks to, for instance, the angle of the branches, so they have this tiny fall on them, as you can see here. So it hangs down a little bit, which is quite common on these types of trees. And yeah, other things that I also do here is actually move each branch up a bit based on the height of the tree. And that's the height of the tree is defined by our random uniform in the next function here, where it first defines how many levels I want, which is between 15 and 20, and then it also adds standard height spacing, which is 2, and then it also adds a random uniform of minus 0.5 and plus 0.5, and then times the height spacing. So the height spacing are always a little bit different on the trees. Yeah. So, and this is basically the function that creates the alive tree. The next two functions is doing basically the same as the two previous ones, combining the branch leaf and creating the alive tree. But instead of creating the alive tree, it actually creates the dead tree. So it doesn't really work anything with the create leaf function. Yeah, but other than that, it's pretty much the same. And the second last function is just restarting the lists that store the information inside Python, which makes it possible for me to group the objects correctly and so on. And the last function is actually creating the cluster. And this is where everything is defined about how many trees I want to create. And it also creates the average tree spacing, so the tree spacing really, with some randomization between them. So the distance between each tree, as you saw when I created the clusters, they are slightly different, or they have a slight different position. So I can try to create one again, maybe with a little bit more trees like this, so yeah, there you can see there's some of them end up being quite close to each other. And one thing that I could have added is a command in Python that makes it impossible for the trees to end up in the same position. But so yeah, if you look at these two trees right here, they almost ended up on the same position. Quite unfortunate, and that's something that I would have worked better on if I had more time. Okay, so that's the script. Then if you can look at just quickly on the UI, it's pretty simple really. I didn't really want to add too many parameters and stuff like that, because it makes it a little bit complicated to use. You see a lot of different scripts that are so extremely complex in the UI, which makes it hard to use actually, even though they try to make it more user-friendly. I really like it when they're just simple as this, and I had a pretty good idea of what kind of trees I wanted to make, and I don't really want it to be too customizable, because there's just two types of trees that I want. It's dead trees and alive trees of Spruce trees. So yeah. It's also worth mentioning though that I assign a couple of materials to my script, or through my script, to the objects. But the script doesn't actually create the materials. The user has to have two materials in the hypershade from before, and those need to be called branch leaf and bark texture. Otherwise, the script won't be able to pick up the materials, and it won't work. It would stop right at the point when it finds the error.